All right, for the record, our spectators have returned, and we will go back on audio again. Juror number 44, you are not on any video whatsoever, strictly on audio, but it is being broadcast. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Nelson for some questioning. Oh, and by the way, if you want, you can also take your mask off. It's totally up to you. I'll keep mine on.
I'm getting hot.
Okay.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Thank you again for your time and being here and answering questions. Sorry for the delays and things of that nature, but we definitely appreciate your participation in this case. So what I'm going to do here moving forward is I am going to ask you a series of kind of general, broad questions just to kind of get to know you a little bit better, and then we're going to focus on some of your responses to the questionnaire you filled out a couple months ago. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
All right. And again, we know that you probably haven't read or thought about this document in the last couple of months. If there are specific things I want to ask you about, I will ask you about them, and I'll tell you what you wrote. Okay? All right. So let's start with this. Let's assume you and I met under different circumstances at some social event or party or whatever, and we were chatting, first introduction. What are a couple things I would walk away knowing about you?
I'm a mom.
Okay.
I love the outdoors, so I'm really active outdoors. And then you know about my job because in the nonprofit sector, yeah, we advocate and talk about our mission-based work.
Great.
A lot.
And again, without identifying anything about who you work for or where you work, what is the general nature of your advocacy in your job?
Current job?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Okay. And I believe, and I'm going to kind of skip forward because I just got to get it out of the way. You've had some contact with Mr. Ellison in the course of your career.
Correct.
Do you know him personally?
No.
Do you socialize with him?
No.
It's simply through kind of your work as an advocate, right?
Correct.
And is there anything about your past experiences with Mr. Ellison that would in any way make it fair or make you a fair or impartial juror?
No.
Okay. One possible outcome of this case would be a not guilty verdict.
Correct.
Would you hesitate in your decision simply by virtue of the fact that you may have to go back to Mr. Ellison at some other time and advocate for your employer?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Just have to be clear and want to make sure.
Well, my decision on the case would be based on the facts.
Perfect.
Either way. So, you know, if the facts show that it's a not guilty, then I'm pretty sure that Mr. Ellison would understand that. And the reverse, right?
Sure.
At least I would hope.
Perfect. All right. So at some point you received a jury summons and questionnaire, and it became clear that you were a prospective juror in this particular case.
Yes.
Now, what was your initial reaction to learning that you could be a juror in this particular case?
Oh my God.
Right. Was that a good oh my God or a bad oh my God? Or
Probably more of a terrifying oh my God.
okay.
Because it is such a high profile case. And so, I mean, that's kind of I've been on a jury before in the past, and it was nothing like what I probably would go through on this jury.
Sure. So in that regard, when you say it was a terrifying kind of a response, did you have concerns for your physical or personal safety or the personal or physical safety of your children?
No, I'm not concerned for physical safety.
Okay. Are you concerned about like being harassed or harangued as a result of your involvement in this case?
I think anyone that said they wouldn't be concerned with that would be lying. So of course I'm concerned with that, because I do think, you know, you have people that are very much wanting a verdict one way or the other, and they may not accept what verdict comes out. And so I think there's a very real potential with that. I mean, when you look at what happened with our election, I mean,
Right.
that's how people respond when they're very emotional about stuff. So I think that's a reality for anyone on this.
Okay. Now, in terms of, let me ask you, in terms of when you first came down to the Hennepin County Government Center and saw the fortifications and the National Guard and law enforcement out in full force, did that, how did that make you feel?
My initial reaction was, how do I get in there?
Yeah, it's a little hard.
But I don't think I had feelings about it. I think, like I said, I know I had heard in the news probably last week or the week before or something that stuff was starting to go up. So I knew to expect it.
Okay, fair enough. And then in terms of learning that, you know, we're doing everything that we can to protect your anonymity at this point, did that help make you feel a little, did that make you feel a little more comfortable about everything?
100%.
Okay, good. You know, you do understand that there's a possibility that at some point in the future, your name could be released as to the public.
Yeah, I think at the end it can be.
And maybe sometime after. We don't know.
Okay.
That hasn't been decided yet. Okay. Does that help assuage some of your concerns?
No, if it's kept private and confidential, there's no reason to be concerned, right? But there is the potential that it's released, and I stay true to what I said before. I mean, there are people feeling strongly on each sides of this. At least I assume there are. I'm pretty sure there are.
Right.
And so I think that reality is there for all jurors if and when those names get released.
Okay, fair enough. So in your personal life, your professional life, your familial life, can you think of a situation where you have been asked to resolve conflict between two people?
All the time.
All right. So how do you approach that situation?
I talk to each person individually typically, and then I usually end up being a mediator so I'm a C-level executive, and
Okay.
so you talk to each individual, get the facts, then you sit down and you kind of mediate, figure out where things go from there. And so I'm talking obviously in my professional level,
Right. So getting both sides of the story is an important component to resolving conflict.
Absolutely.
How about other things, like maybe what other people saw or what other information is available?
If they're involved, yes. It's a 360 type of thing.
Okay. And so have you ever been in that context, have you ever had two people who you have to decide who's telling the truth between those two people?
Well, that's always the case when there's conflict, right?
Not necessarily, I would think, but I mean...
We're humans. I mean, so what one person perceives as truth is typically different than what another person perceives as truth.
Okay.
Because of, how we were raised, our environment, just the way our brains work, all that kind of stuff, right? So I think sometimes it can just, I guess, be a personality conflict, and there's not a truth that you're sussing out. It's just dealing with the personality conflict. But if it's about finding the truth, there's perceived truth. And if you're not there physically to see that, even though you would have a perceived truth within that, you have to do the best with the facts that are presented.
Okay, great. Can you think of a certain situation again in your life where you were 100% convinced that you were correct, but it later turned out that you were wrong?
Sure, there's times with my ex-spouse that that you are certain that you told them that XYZ was happening, and then they prove you that
Gotcha.
it's not true.
Yeah. So how do you, what's the reaction when you kind of go, oh, mea culpa, my bad, I was wrong?
Take ownership.
Take ownership. Okay. Do you think that a person who exercises his or her right to a trial is not taking ownership of what he or she may be accused of?
No, I think it's their right to a trial.
Okay, good. Would you be able to, I mean, we all have our perceptions of the law and what we think is right and what we think should be done. In this case, the judge is going to give you a set of jury instructions that instructs you on the law. Would you be able to follow the law even if you thought it was wrong or that the law should be changed?
Absolutely, you follow the law.
Okay. Now, I'm going to just turn to some of your responses. Again, ma'am, I'm not trying to trick you. I just want to make sure we can flush out some of what you wrote in a little bit more detail. Are you okay with that? Okay. So the first question that was presented in the questionnaire was just to kind of give us what you know about this case type question. And you actually wrote 2 full pages about what you knew, and you had some. It was clear you were following, I think, this case in the news at that time. Is that fair?
Kind of.
And
there was a lot of news. Did I follow the news about it? No.
Okay. But you were exposed to a lot of the news based on just...
I don't see how you couldn't be.
Right. And you paid, I'm sure you paid attention to all of the news, but, you remembered things that you heard from the media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not going to necessarily go through all of your responses, but would you recognize or would you be able to understand that you have to decide this case based upon the evidence as it is presented in court?
Yes.
And you may have heard something in the media beforehand, and you may think that that information is relevant information to your decision. Would you agree that that's a possibility at least?
I would say no to that. I mean, sure, there's a possibility, but media is biased and they don't have all the facts.
Okay.
I am guessing if I'm on this jury, I get to see and hear all the facts. So I'm getting information that they did not have when they were reporting back then. And
So there may be certain pieces of information that they may be technically true, right? They may have been reported upon, but they're ultimately not relevant to this case, and the lawyers or the court may decide that the jury doesn't get to hear this. Can you abide by that?
Absolutely.
And you can abide by deciding this case on the facts as presented in court?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you a question about what we're kind of referring to as the video for purposes of jury selection. There was a bystander video that was taken. It was uploaded to Facebook. It went viral. It became the news. There was a question in here that asked if you had seen any video of this event. Is that the video you understood this to be, or were there other videos that you've seen?
I think I answered it in there, but I'll repeat. So I saw I didn't watch the whole video, any video that I saw, but there was 2 different videos. One was a bystander filming it by the police car where, I know the Asian officer, and I don't remember his name. Sure. He was standing there and he was interacting with the person that was filming.
Okay.
So I watched partially that video, and then I partially watched a video of like security camera footage.
Okay.
Of I think a store across the street or something like that, but I think I maybe watched 30 seconds of that video.
Okay. So your access to these videos, were they by like just what you saw on the news, or did you actually go onto the internet and like onto Facebook or something and search for the actual videos?
I can't recall if I actually ever searched for a video, but I believe, somebody else posted the video and I probably pressed play off the internet or, off of Facebook or Instagram or something.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
And you don't think you've watched the entirety of
I know I haven't watched the entirety of it.
Okay. Why didn't you?
It was emotional.
Okay.
I think you have so much coming from you from the media and from what people are posting on Facebook and stuff, so you have a perceived idea of what's going to happen in the video. And I decided I didn't want to watch it.
Okay. Now, based upon what you've seen in the media, based upon these videos that you've watched, the questionnaire asks you a couple of questions about your perceptions of both Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd, right? And in terms of your perception of Mr. Chauvin, you check the box marked somewhat negative, and then when asked why, you wrote, I feel the officers have different levels of culpability. I do not know the laws and procedures of the police for detainment, but a man died, and I'm sure that's not procedure, right?
Correct.
But you acknowledge you don't know what the police procedures are, right?
Correct.
And if you were to hear evidence that was contrary to that, would you be able to accept the fact that perhaps procedures are different than you thought they may be?
I don't know what they are, so the evidence put forth would be fact.
Okay, good. With respect to Mr. Floyd, you had a more neutral opinion of Mr. Floyd, and you wrote, Mr. Floyd was not a model citizen. Most of us have some skeletons, and he may have had more than most, but he didn't deserve to die. So in terms of the phrase deserve to die, right? Have you formed an opinion as to who is responsible for Mr. Floyd's death?
No, because I don't have all the facts.
Okay. We're all human, right?
Right.
And we all form our own opinions, and we all are entitled to our own beliefs. And you're perfectly within your right as a human being and a citizen to have your own opinions. But what we need to make sure is that can you take any opinions that you may have formed, kind of set them to the side, see the evidence as it happens in this trial, and make a decision based on that as opposed to your perceived opinions. Can you do that?
Yes.
Now, you were asked about whether you had talked to friends and family members and things of that nature and what opinions you may have shared. And you said that, yes, you have talked to your friends and family. Did you post on, this is it's a convoluted question because it asks about friends, families, social media, all of that. Okay. Did you post anything on social media about your opinions that you recall?
I honestly cannot recall.
Okay.
But I lean more towards the side of I probably didn't post anything.
Did not?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't 100%
guarantee it.
Right. But
you don't remember like sharing any, like once you saw that video, did you share it with your friends on Facebook or Instagram?
I really don't think I did.
Okay.
But I can't be 100% sure.
Okay. What you wrote in terms of the opinions you expressed to your friends and family, at least, was that you had sympathy for Mr. Floyd as well as the officers. Can you explain that a little to me?
Everyone's lives are changed by this incident and what happened. Everyone's lives, and it's not easy for anyone. And so, yeah, I have sympathy or empathy, for everyone involved because this is life-altering, life-changing, and it's hard.
Okay. And you have some friends or colleagues or family members who participated in protests after the incident?
I've had a couple friends that have done protests. Yes.
Okay. Did you talk to them about their experiences in that?
No.
Okay. You're just aware they did?
Yeah.
Okay. You were asked a question about your belief as to whether or not the community has been negatively or positively affected by any of the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities area since George Floyd's death. And you wrote, both. The raising of voices is being heard around the world for change, and that's good, but the community, businesses, and neighborhoods have suffered greatly. That's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree that there's a difference between a protest and a riot?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. And do you think that the people who protested are also responsible for the rioting?
The mass majority, no.
Okay. But some may have been involved in both.
Correct. But I don't know, because once again, I wasn't there, and all you get is biased media.
Sure. Fair enough. So there was a list of statements in the questionnaire, and then you were asked to rank whether you agree or disagree and to the level of agreement or disagreement. Again, I'm not expecting you to remember each statement and how you answered it, but I just have some follow-ups to ask you about your thoughts on some of these statements.
Okay.
So the first statement is, discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. And your response was, I strongly disagree with that, right?
Correct. Well, that's how I feel, yes.
Okay. You just recognize that the media can be biased, right?
Yes.
So why do you strongly disagree with that statement? What information?
My career.
Okay. So you have within your professional career, you have experienced or talked to firsthand minorities and seen how they've been treated, and you think the media does not conflate or exaggerate?
There's absolutely exaggerations.
Okay.
Yes.
But you ultimately feel that minorities have been treated poorly by the system?
I believe, yes, we've disenfranchised them, and laws were created many, many years ago that have not kept up with society and cultural changes. And so, does there need to be changes? Absolutely. I mean, we're talking laws that were in many, many, many years ago, and society is very different now than it was back then.
Sure. Do you think that sometimes the law can be reactionary, meaning something happens and all of a sudden we just change all the laws to?
Yes, I believe it can be reactionary too.
And do you think there's inherent danger in that?
Yes.
You were asked, police in this country treat whites and black equally, and you somewhat disagreed with that statement. Can you explain that?
I think that I somewhat disagree with, once again, I somewhat disagree because most of my information is coming from media or other people's lived experiences, but it's not something that I've personally lived or have been around or experienced. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
So I'm somewhat disagreeing just because of what I'm hearing from other people, right?
Sure. Makes perfect sense. One of the statements reads, police in my community make me feel safe, and you somewhat agreed with that. Can you explain your thinking there?
I think that's in response to obviously what happened with my older child at the time, and for the most part, I feel safe in my community. But there's always those instances where you kind of go, or whatever. But I wouldn't want a community without them.
Okay, fair enough. There is a question that says, the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities, and you strongly agreed with that.
Yes.
And again, is that sort of the same answer based on your your firsthand knowledge of people's lived experiences as well as the media?
It's mainly based on the work that I've done in my career.
Okay. So you were asked a series of questions as to the organization or movements known as Black Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter. With respect to Black Lives Matter, you checked the box, somewhat favorable was your impression, and you wrote, I believe there is a negative bias with government systems, especially with the Black and Native communities. Excessive force against blacks must stop, but not everyone working in the system is bad. Can you explain kind of that thinking a little more?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I believe that there is bias within the system towards Black and Indigenous people of color. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember everything you just said that
Sure.
I wrote. And so I've seen it in my work. And repeat what I wrote. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
Right, we do it all the time.
You wrote, so that I think answers the first part, and then you wrote, excessive force against black must stop, but not everyone working in the system is bad.
Yeah, so I do believe that what I've heard, once again from a biased media typically, is, you know, there's this impression that everyone within the system is corrupt or bad or against BIPOC, you know, and I don't think that's true.
Sure. Well, let me. You raise an interesting point about perceived bias. Do you think that the system intentionally, in every single case, is biased against a minority person?
Not intentionally, no.
Okay. Do you think that the system, it's possible that a system could be treating a minority person just the same way they would treat a white person, right? But that because that person is experiencing it for him or herself, they feel that the system is skewed against them? So it's their own perceived bias that the system...
Well, of course that can happen.
Sure. And even though the system may be treating people exactly the same in that circumstance, regardless of their color, one person may see it as, well, I'm okay, you know, it's fine, it's the way the system works. And another person may say, this is just systematic, it's an example because I'm being negatively affected.
You're probably not going to like my answer here, but I'd say it's both.
Okay. And explain. It's not my answer; it's yours, right? Explain.
I think there's inherent bias in the system, and as I said, it's years and years of laws that were created for a society that no longer exists, and the laws need to be changed. So that's inherent bias, and so. Do I think this is the best way to put it. So I had a staff member who was black who worked for me, and I think when we started talking about white privilege, when that term came about, I was trying to better understand it, and I admitted I didn't get it. Like, why do we have to call racism or something a new term? And she explained it to me where her son, who's the same age as my oldest, the two of them could be in the same community, driving the exact same car, abiding all the rules of the road. But my white son, if he gets pulled over, doesn't have to have fear of like putting his hands on the steering wheel where the police can see him and not moving until the police tell them to get your registration or get your driver's license. Whereas her son, she's taught him growing up, this is what you do if you get pulled over by the police. And that was not something I ever thought about teaching my son. And so that's when I talk about that inherent systematic bias and whatnot. I mean, those are some of the things that I reflect upon.
Right. So let me, since we're having this discussion, let me ask you and it's an intellectual exercise, right? Let me ask you, can the inverse be true? So take a situation where the city has enacted a law, an ordinance that says your fence can't be more than 6 feet tall, right? And the city, there's 2 houses, and they both have an 8-foot fence, and it's clearly in violation of the ordinance, right? And the city takes enforcement action against both families, right? The only difference between the 2 is one is white and one is black. Is it possible that either side could say, I'm being treated unfairly?
Sure, they could say that.
Okay. And even though the system is simply enforcing the rule
Right.
equally, is it possible that one side would say, I'm being discriminated against?
It's possible somebody would say that, yes.
With respect to Blue Lives Matter, you write you have a somewhat favorable opinion of that, and you write, not all police are bad. I don't want them terrorized or disrespected, but the bad behavior police need to go. Fair enough. Any further comment on that, or is that self-explanatory?
Self-explanatory.
Okay.
But I would say all bad behaviors, right? Not just police, but
Sure.
the question was specific to police.
You would agree that the police serve a valid function within the community,
Yes.
and the police at least help to make you feel somewhat safe, right?
Yes.
Council read the same part.
Wanted to serve on this jury. And you checked both yes and not sure. And you wrote, I marked yes and not sure because I believe I would render a decision based on the facts presented, but worry that it will be such a high-profile trial. What does that translate into once it is over and people know I was on the jury? I just have to ask you. You can look at the facts and the evidence as presented in this case and analyze them in an impartial and fair way, correct?
Correct.
And you would apply that same standard as far as impartiality to the facts to both Mr. Chauvin and the state of Minnesota.
Yes.
You understand that the burden of proof is on the state of Minnesota.
Yes, I do.
Do you understand that Mr. Chauvin has no obligation to present any evidence, to call any witnesses? We don't even have to ask a single question. Are you okay with that?
I understand that, yes.
And would you hold that against him if we didn't?
No, that's his right.
Ultimately, do the precautions that are being taken to protect your anonymity resolve the other half of your answer?
I think I go back to what we first started our questioning on, is there's still the potential that eventually the anonymity is not going to be there. And I mean, and that's a very real thing. I don't think it changes that answer. I mean, I think I have a very analytical brain. I'm very much about facts and details. And so I think I'd be extremely fair, but yeah, I mean, how can it not give anyone pause that afterwards, if your name is released, that...
So let me ask you one last question. If you sat as a juror on this case, and you ultimately, or the jury ultimately rendered a not guilty verdict, you work in an industry that advocates for change, that advocates for legislative change, that advocates for policy change. You've referenced conversations you've had with coworkers. Would you be able to go back into that situation and explain why you reached a verdict, or would you be concerned that your community would reject you if you had made that decision?
I think at the end of the day, the only people that are going to see all the facts are the people that are in that courtroom, the jurors, you all, and you have to render a verdict based on the facts and the evidence in the case. And they aren't there, and they're not going to necessarily see all that. I don't know how much gets publicized of the stuff and how much is kept confidential. And so at the end of the day, I don't think any external person, I know they will, but they don't have a right to judge because they weren't there. They don't know all the facts. And what they are told is only bits and pieces, typically. So.
Fair enough. May I have just a moment, Your Honor? Your Honor, we'll pass for cause.
Right. Juror 44. We're not done with you yet. But I've been pushing everybody pretty hard here without breaks. So what we're going to do is we're going to break for lunch. And I think we'll come back at 1:15. We have Random Acts of Catering that will provide you with a lunch. Sorry you didn't get a chance to weigh in on what you would like, but we'll have a lunch for you while you wait for us to resume, at which time the state will have its chance to talk to you. So if you could go to the deputy and he'll escort you back to the courtroom.
Okay.
We're outside the hearing of the juror. Before we break for lunch, just to make a record that the parties have stipulated that the following juror numbers will be excused for cause: 58, 80, 81, 84, 93, 94, and 100. Am I correct with that, Mr. Nelson?
I may have just a moment
Sure.
to double check my notes.
And Mr. Slisher, if you could also check. And I can read them again if you'd like.
As the defenses as well.
All right, and that's by stipulation. Those jurors will be excused for cause. Just a pause here. This juror took quite a bit of time, understandably so. The state still has to reach this person. So we have 4 from the morning who are going to be in the afternoon. I've already cut loose jurors 54 and 55. My question for counsel, since you know this better than I do, as far as how long some of these other jurors might take, should we cut loose 51 and 52? Only because that's a mark where we'd have to do another group. And I really don't like to do a group advisory of only one juror. For now, we have 51 and 52 remaining for the afternoon, so that we would have 5.5.
We estimate to get from 50, but probably the best we could do.
50 is excused, is that correct? Yeah, 51. You think you could get through 51?
50 and 51 are in the afternoon group, right?
Correct. Well, 50 is excused.
Oh, 50 is excused.
That was the earlier stipulation. 51 and 52 are currently going to be here in the afternoon. I've excused 54 and 55. So my question for counsel is, should I also excuse 51 and or 52?
I think it's definitely 52. 51 somewhere on the bubble.
I would agree with that assessment.
All right. We may end up doing a single advisory, but we'll do that then. They might be on their way in any case. It is noon.
If we can just have a second.
Sure. You want white noise, Mr. Nelson?
Mr. Nelson?
I think we're in agreement we can excuse the afternoon group.
All right, let's do that then. 51 and 52 will join 54 and 55 on Monday morning as opposed to this afternoon, which means we have 3.5 jurors to get through this afternoon. I appreciate your attention to this detail, and we'll see you at 1:15. Thank you. We're in recess.